Right. Hey, friends. Welcome to a little different discussion tonight. Normally, we're going over, acquisitions, game collections, type of thing. I actually have a guest with me. We're going to talk a little bit about what to do with your collection. So I'm going to introduce a longtime friend and associate, Russ Nesevich. He is the owner of Nesevich Law. They have offices and are licensed in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. He's been doing estate planning since 2010. And full disclosure here, a few years ago, I used Russ to work on my estate when we lived in New Jersey and have since moved out. So I have to have that updated a little bit. But thanks for joining me. Glad to
You
have you on
bet.
board here. I think I got the introduction right. Anything you want to add?
No, terrific. Just we've known each other for a long time. It's nice to see you, and I'm thrilled to do this with you. So thanks for having me.
So, reason I invited Russ here is obviously buy and sell used items, game collections. Everybody has a collection. Everybody, be it comics, baseball cards, silverware, your grandma's doily collection. I don't know, whatever it is. Um, to you personally, when you're collecting this stuff, it means a lot. You know what you paid for it. You know what it took to find that rare item. You know all that stuff. However, I'm guessing, and you may be able to clue me in a little bit on this, is heirs, survivors, spouses, they probably don't share that same passion a lot of times on this type of stuff. That pretty safe to say.
Pretty safe to say. We see a lot of that kind of stuff, right? There's sentimental value, which obviously runs the spectrum, right? And then obviously there's actual value, which is what someone would pay for something. And when we deal with estate planning and we deal with families who are doing estate planning, we're often dealing with both. So quite often people will come to us and we'll be doing estate planning and we'll be talking about their wills and talking about how sometimes they want to leave specific things to specific people and things that are very, very important to them. Other times we have people that come in and say, nobody wants any of my junk. I just want to make sure that the assets get transferred correctly. Everything else they'll probably call in a truck and have it hauled away. And then we have everybody in between, right, to whom they and it's not just collections, but it's anything there's one of, right? So imagine that you have 2 kids or 3 kids, but there's only one engagement ring, there's only one wedding band, there's only one grandfather clock that's been in the family for generations. How do you deal with those things, and how do you ensure that the 3 kids don't fight? So we always encourage people that when there are things like that, either things that are sentimentally valuable, financially valuable, or something like a collection, that you deal with it and you address it as part of your estate plan whenever possible and whenever that makes sense.
I mean, one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on is I as I buy collections, and the people who I'm buying them from get to that point where they're either thinking of getting rid of it on their own, or their
Yeah,
estate is having to deal with it. I'm finding that that's happening more and more often,
sure.
just with the clientele I deal with. I mean, have you seen a horror story of that type of thing?
So the horror stories aren't just for collections. The horror stories are general, right? But we can certainly apply them to collections. So let me just give you, and by the way, I'm going to speak very specifically about New Jersey law, but quite often what we see here in New Jersey applies, in all likelihood, applies to your state as well, but it may not. So let me just be really, really clear. For the most part, I'm talking about New Jersey. So here in New Jersey, if you have a will and your will addresses your stuff, probate is a relatively simple process. You file the will with the county, you're issued letters, testamentary, and short certificates, which are basically the documents that give you the executor authority to act on the estate. And the will can outline very specifically what happens, where the assets go, how they want the assets handled, what happens to the collection. Are they going to bring somebody in to liquidate the collection? Is the collection going to go to someone specific? Whatever it is that person wants done. When you don't have a will, or you haven't addressed any of those plans, it's just harder. So an administrator has to be appointed. Well, what if both of your kids or three of your kids or eight of your kids all apply to be the administrator because they don't trust each other, even though the law says exactly what's supposed to happen to your stuff when there's no will, but they don't trust each other. So they all apply to be the administrator. The administrator here in New Jersey has to do what's called posting a bond, where they basically are buying an insurance policy that they won't abscond with your stuff. So now all of a sudden there's a cost to being the administrator that there wouldn't have been had they had a will. There's all sorts of different levels of rules and responsibility that an administrator has to abide by, that an executor doesn't have to abide by. So all of these things, it just becomes harder. When you have something like a collection and you have a will that details specifically what happens to that collection, it makes it a heck of, or that article that's really important to somebody, it makes it a heck of a lot harder for people to fight and disagree. Now they have to prove that you weren't competent, that there was undue influence, that you didn't mean it the way that you said it. So there's all sorts of kind of backstops against people not doing what you want done by way of your will with your collection. And you want to be specific, right? You want to say, hey, I want it sold piecemeal. I want it sold as one collection. Here's 5 people I'd like you to contact who deal in these kinds of things, right? Hey, by the way, I've let a number of people know that my collection will eventually come up for sale upon my passing. They are waiting with checks in hand to buy it, right? So all of these things are things that you could do very specifically in your will, that when you don't have a will and you haven't thought these things through, we see that's when all hell breaks loose, right? Because people either don't know, or they do know, but they don't trust each other, or they start to disagree. I bike. I'm an avid cyclist, despite the fact that I may not look like an avid cyclist. I'm probably about 40 pounds heavier than your average avid cyclist. But I'm an avid cyclist. And there's a joke in the biking community that, when I die, I hope my wife doesn't sell my bikes for what I told them I paid for them, right? Because some bikes can become really, really expensive. And, the joke is that you lie to your spouse about how much you paid for the bike. So if they don't know, they don't know. And then when you're gone, things become really difficult. And that's when you have these sort of infighting and literally, children suing each other over. I have been involved in literally people paying me hundreds of dollars an hour for them to argue over a $30 vase from Target that, mom had in the kitchen that was important to both of them. And by the way, it's never about the vase, or it's never about the collection. It's always about, who wronged who when they were 7, and they've been carrying this inside for all these years. And now they want to take it out on their sibling or their niece or whatever it is. So it's always better to think this stuff through and have it planned out ahead of time.
I think that joke is in every collector's community, by the way. It's great.
Right.
And I think you touched on really, how do you make it easy on the survivors? I mean, this is the key thing that we as people and want to make sure that our loved ones are not put into a situation which is really tough, because let's be honest, I'm not saying this on the normal everyday stuff, but like when it's some kind of prized possession or something like that, where this value, or what it takes to get this, like you have to have that set ahead of time, because there is absolutely situations where the stuff goes into the dumpster, with no knowledge, or there could be animosity between the spouse. Oh man, all those years, I'm going to show you. It's going right out the door, right? So, I mean, you definitely nailed it with like, how do we make it easier on the people we are, our families.
I do webinars every week as part of my practice. I do these 35, 40-minute educational webinars. And I always sort of lay out for the first 10 minutes why estate planning is important. And then I always poll the audience online, right? I let them click on an answer. And I always poll them and I say, of all these things that I talked about, these things that are important, right? Making sure nobody fights, making things as easy as possible, tax avoidance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What's the most important thing to those of you who are on the line? And I usually get 20 or 30 people on the line. And the number one answer every single time is, I just want to make things as easy as possible for my heirs. I just want to make things as easy as possible for the people I've left behind. So the way that you do that is have an inventory of your stuff. Give them a place to go to liquidate it, right? Somebody who's going to know what they're doing. Don't send them to the flea market to try to sell it one off, right? I mean, you know who the people like you are that they should call for specific things, right? Give them a list of the 3 or 4 people. Make sure that those 3 or 4 people are aware that they're on that list, and someday they may get a phone call, right? So all of these things are things that you want to do. And by the way, outside of the collector world, have a file with all of your statements in it so that they know where you bank, right? I mean, I have clients who literally these 90-year-old widows or widowers who have a CD at every bank in town. Unless they keep those statements, their heirs aren't going to know to go to every bank in town. So, and it's one of the things like in the binder that we gave you when we did estate planning for you, I said, hey, here in section 3, make sure you put all your statements, right? So things like that, it all applies to your collection as well. Have an inventory, have a place for them to go, give them guidance on how you want to sell it, give them an idea of how much it should be worth so they're not getting ripped off. All of these things, you just want to make it easy for your heirs, right? Where do you keep the stuff? Is it in a safe? What's the combination? Somebody should know these things.
Yeah, and from a buyer's perspective, from a dealer's perspective, like there's no karmically, I am not going to mess around with the widow or the like I'm going to be as fair as possible because I just believe in that type of business. Like that is just one of those areas like, hey, you just don't mess around with that. But beyond that, like, you can go to a dealer, you can go to a collector who might want to buy the collection en masse, but realistically, the one thing you should never expect is that your heirs are going to go and set up an eBay account and start selling this off piecemeal. I mean, it's just not physically or feasibly possible for them to do that. And so that has to be out of the equation. You have to make sure that you have those, like you said, the inventory, what it's going to take to sell that off and who they should contact, because that'll make everyone's lives a lot easier, especially in a very niche product. There may only be a couple people who are looking for that type of stuff.
And look, if there isn't, and you think eBay is the best route, right, to take your collection and piecemeal it off on eBay, well, there's services that you can hire who will take the entire collection and piecemeal it off on eBay, right? And they'll take a cut and whatever it is. But your heirs are not going to sit there with a camera and a whiteboard behind it and take pictures of all of your items and post them on eBay. So you have to give them that guidance in advance. I think that's exactly right.
Yeah. So let's assume that you've cataloged it and you've got it ready to go, so what happens let's upon your death, like what should the expectation be on how this will go through for them?
Yeah, well, it depends on how you did it, right? So it's really what a lot of people don't realize is it's really up to you. So if you so let's assume you have a will. Let's assume that you do that correctly, and in whatever state you're in, an executor has been named, and now it is the executor's job to deal with your affairs, to consolidate the assets, to maybe sell some assets, open up an estate account, consolidate the money, distribute it to your heirs. It's a relatively simple process. But in your will, you could give them very specific guidance on how you want that done. Who do you want them to call? Do you want the collection sold off? Do you want it donated? Do you want it all to be given to someone specific? Do you want one specific child to inherit it because they've always had an interest, right? I've always played baseball cards with my son. I want him to have it. He may not get max value for it, but I don't care. If it goes in the dumpster at that point, I want him to be the one to do it, right? So people don't realize wills are quite often very, very general. Wills quite often say, I leave everything I own to my spouse. If my spouse has predeceased me, I leave everything equally to my children. Period. That's the will. But it doesn't have to be that way. It could be far more specific. You could have a will that says, I want the entirety of my collection, which is located in the corner of the basement and is cataloged in a separate document referenced by my will. I want the entirety of that collection to be sold by John Smith auctioneers within 90 days of my passing. You can do that, right? So you can be that specific. In New Jersey, we allow for the will to reference something called a personal property memorandum, which is a document outside of your will that lists specific things that you want given to specific people. You can't use it for specific, you can't use it for financial assets. So you can't say like my checking account, right? But that diamond ring, the engagement band, the car, the antique collectible clock, the game collection, the baseball card collection, whatever it is, you can say, I want all that to go to so-and-so. And you can even do it outside the will, so it's not public information. Nobody knows where it went. You can sort of just reference it. So that's a really, really good way to do it. I would caution you a couple of things. Some people are avid firearms collectors. Consult with the laws in your state, because really, really important how firearms are done. I personally probably have 100 bottles of bourbon in my basement. I wouldn't call myself a collector, but somehow I seem to be. I've accumulated lots and lots of bourbon, right? Unless you want the ATF to come knocking on your door, when you're dealing with firearms, when you're dealing with alcohol, be careful about telling your estate that they have to sell the firearms or the alcohol, right? So there's ways to do that. There's appropriate ways to do that. You just want to make sure that those things are handled appropriately. Much less to worry about if you're dealing with a game collection, Dungeons and Dragons, a baseball card collection, right? All of those things. But if you're dealing with gun collections, alcohol collections, certainly you have to address those in different ways and be a little bit more sensitive.
Yeah, and I think that's way outside the scope of what we're
Sure.
doing. And as we said earlier, this is just a recommendation for people. We are not trying to say that this is legal advice.
Right.
I'll leave Russ's contact information in the comments section. If you're in New Jersey or Pennsylvania and you'd like to have a consult with him, I'm sure he will be happy to do so with you.
Or I can refer you to someone in your state.
Absolutely. I was just going to say you could probably reference him to someone. So, I mean, I think, really we kind of touched on the basic stuff here. I don't like, the whole goal is not to get into too deep here. I mean, Russ, I'm sure could go on for hours about this stuff, and probably does in his webinars. But what the goal was for my clients is to say, hey, you have an asset here. This is, obviously you've spent years collecting it. A lot of times you bought it from me. I would love to buy some of this stuff back down the road properly. What I don't want to have happen is that dumpster gets backed up to the house and a lot of this stuff just gets chucked right into it because, that's what none of us want. So, use this as a way to think about, hey, what do I need to do to plan it? Even if it's the start of, your thought process. We all have to start it somewhere. And as we age, it's really kind of critical to do so. So, I think, really just wanted a nice, short, sweet conversation. I really appreciate your time, Russ. This was great. Anything you wanted to add in the last minute there, or?
Yeah, I'll if you don't mind, I'll leave you with two thoughts.
Absolutely.
Currently, as we sit here in 2022, the federal estate tax exemption is $12 million. So it doesn't affect most people, right? Most people have less than $12 million in assets. Some people are lucky enough to have more than $12 million in assets, and they would rather not pay federal taxes if they can avoid it. If you have a valuable collection, things like art, right? Those kinds of things. There's two things to think about. Number one, by making charitable gifts at the time of your passing, whether it be a portion of that collection or otherwise, you can lower the value of your estate below that $12 million number and avoid some estate taxes. The other thing is there are rules around things like collectibles, where because there's a limited market for collectibles, you may think that your, Van Gogh is worth $1 million, but you get to tell the IRS that Van Gogh is only worth $600,000 or $700,000. And the reason is because it's a collectible item with a limited number of buyers and it's difficult to sell. And the fact that there's a limited number of buyers and it's difficult to sell, it's called a lack of marketability. It allows you to discount the value of that collectible. So if you have an estate worth more than $12 million, which maybe somebody watching this does, I would certainly encourage you to consult with a really qualified tax attorney or estate planning attorney to think about using that collection as a way to help you offset the total value of your estate. I think it's something that people don't realize a lot, and it's something to consider. But the point of this from the eyes of an estate planning attorney is whenever you're dealing with things like this, things that are valuable to you sentimentally, financially, whatever it is, have a plan. Put a plan together, make it easy for your heirs, have it cataloged, tell them what you want done, and it's far more likely that things will happen the way that you want them to happen.
Awesome. And there was a second thing, or that was
Those were the two.
awesome,
I think.
great.
I think
Appreciate it. Definitely. Hopefully, this helped someone out there to make that plan, get the next step going, and makes it a little easier to take that next step. So, Russ, I really appreciate you taking time out to join me here, and hopefully it helps somebody to get going on this. So,
My pleasure.
all right, take care. You have a good one.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike.